Hello everyone, my name is Matt. This is my channel, Killick Fabrications, and like many of you right now who are probably on lockdown or social isolation with all that's going on in the world, I've decided to try to document building some of my bicycle frames. I'm a hobby frame builder out of Victoria, BC, and I'm going to turn these aluminum tubes into a track bike, and this is how I'm going to go about doing it. So first thing I need to do for starting my frame build is I like to take my tubing and mark it so I know which tube is for what. So this is a 42mm down tube. I like to mark with the head tube and the bottom bracket. I do that because the thickness of the tube actually changes throughout the length. So it's a little bit thicker up at the head tube, it's a little bit thinner in the middle to save weight, and it's a little bit thinner over here at the bottom bracket. And I do that for every tube. So next thing I'm gonna do is I use a program called BikeCAD, and it gives me, I can print out the design of the frame I'm gonna be building. I don't know if that'll focus. So this is basically what I'm gonna be building. So it's an aluminum track bike made out of 7005 aluminum. And because I do everything by hand, you get these little paper templates that you can cut out and then trace the template onto the tube so I know where and how to cut each tubing. And before I do that, I take blue Dykem sort of layout die and I mark the end. So I get a nice contrast. So once this dries, it'll scratch a nice line in there, and then I'll know exactly how to cut my tube. So while that's drying, I'm gonna take, so this is the seat tube. I'm gonna take my seat tube to bottom bracket, which is this guy right down here, and I'm going to cut it out. So I just have a little kitchen cutting board here that I normally use. Let's move this out of the way. So I like to use a ruler to try to keep my lines as straight as possible, and just use a nice sharp X-Acto knife to cut it out. I find that works the best. So I'll just set that aside. And now I'm going to cut. So I generally use a little bit of electrical tape. Now this is all nice and dry. You can just wrap this around and try to be careful. Oh, it's still a little bit wet. So that they meet up nicely. Just like that. And now I take a scribe of some kind, which I can't find, so I'm just going to use a small file, and I just scratch in the lines for the tube. You could use a Sharpie, I just like using the blue layout die. So now you get a nice line all the way around, so I know exactly where I need to cut. It was still a little bit wet when I put the template on, but that's okay. So now I'm going to do this to all the tubes. Alright, so for the cutting, you can use just a regular old hacksaw, and I generally use that for most steel, but on this aluminum, I actually really like to use these small coping saws, and this has got a 24 TPI blade. So now I'm just going to do a rough cut on this tube. So I rough cut the tubing. Let's see if I can get that in focus. And if I put this up, you'll see that it's very, well, that's not focused at all. Quite close. So then it's just a small amount of filing I need to do in order to get it to the right dimensions. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to file the top of this tube so that it'll fit nicely on the bottom bracket shell. This is a 68mm BSA threaded bottom bracket shell, and that's what I'm going to be using for this build. So I'm just going to be using a half round file. With aluminum, it's really important to have a file brush, because what happens is you'll get all the aluminum will start to stick on the inside and it'll become less effective and damage the file. So if you can see, this is what will happen, is all of the aluminum gets stuck inside the file. So it's important to clean all that off every few strokes. And it's a good reminder that files only cut in one direction. So it only cuts this way on the So if you can, I don't know if you can see that or not. So there's no rock back and forth this way. It doesn't want to twist in there. And it's kind of hard to see, but on this forward side, the side that's facing the camera, is just slightly higher than this side facing away from the camera. And what I'm seeing is it's touching on this side and there's a small gap on the back side. Let me just move the camera so maybe you can see that better. So I can put my, I don't know if you can see, there's a very small gap in there, and then this way they're pretty much bang on. So if I throw that on there, you can see it's a nice tight fit up. And before I weld it, I'm gonna break the edge. So right now the edge is very thin, so what I'm gonna have to do is actually file the outside away like that, so it's a nice flat edge, and then I have a nice spot to weld into to make sure I get good penetration, so I'm not just burning away the smallest amount of edge of the tube. So that's the start of my C-tube bottom bracket connection.